Hi, I'm Tommy Glowacki,
I'm Alex Cush.
and today we're going to be interviewing my grandpa Raymond Glowacki on December 8th, 2019, in Cudahy, Wisconsin.
Ethan Two Tie Blaze is doing the video and audio work.
All right. You were born in the year 1932, correct?
Correct.
What is your earliest memories you have, if any, of the Great Depression?
Well, to say I remember it more from it being told to me or reacting later on in my life to realize that there was such a thing. Your parents never really talked about the circumstance of it being the Depression and what it was doing. I learned much later in my life how really bad business was for my parents in that time, how difficult it was. But at the time I was growing up, it was what everybody else was doing, and as a kid, you weren't making reference to any of that. But it was as you grew, you started to realize that this had happened, and it had taken several years to go through. And then later on, understanding, for example, my mother explained to me that one time in their cash register, now this is doing a business, they had just a $5 bill. $5 between them and anything else. That's hard to imagine. But it was a matter that they hung on through the years of the Depression. My father went out and got another job. He started distributing beer for a local Milwaukee brewery. And I remember on occasion going with him. I remember what he had to go through in order to do this. That was, you're not knowing it in a sense of using the term, well, we were in the Depression. That wasn't what was the case. You lived it. It was later on that someone took the time to explain what was going on. And so that's how you live through that stuff.
You mentioned your parents before, Stellan and Stanley Glowacki. Those are their names, correct?
Correct, yes.
What brewery did they work at, and what made them settle in Cudahy?
Now you're asking me to go back several years. I don't really remember the name of the brewery, but my mother lived in Milwaukee. My father had a business initially in Milwaukee, and in June of 1927, he bought the Pulaski Inn in the city of Cudahy. 3 years later, he married my mother. And 2 years later, it's 1932, I made the scene. They came to Cudahy for the circumstance that he was here already. He was already established in what he was doing. And so that's how we came to Cudahy.
You mentioned your parents owned a brewery. Did they ever have to deal with the issues of prohibition while they owned it?
Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And prohibition was not an easy thing. But the one thing you find in circumstances like these, where you're sort of dealing with a very, very unpopular idea, and prohibition was very unpopular. It was a matter that people found ways to get around it. They started brewing their own kinds of alcohol in their homes. There was a thing that was said that if in the winter your roof, the top of your roof, if there was snow on in every other home on the roof and yours didn't have any snow, the presumption is that you were brewing something. Little things like that. You heard of bathtub gin. They made stuff as best as they could in the circumstances that they were in. Maybe in some cases you had situations where they were a little bit more polished in effect of how they did things. They were more organized. But there were all kinds of little business ventures going on out of their home, out of their garages or whatever. And then they found ways to sell their stuff to various bars that were around, or privately they took it to people's homes. You had people, for example, wheeling baby carriages. Alongside the baby laying in there were bottles of gin or whiskey, and they made their deliveries that way. It was a time that people had to be a little bit ingenious. Sometimes you ended up irritating some people with what you were doing, but it was a way that you made a living. And it was a way of getting around a very, very unpopular thing.
All right. Let's go back to a bit of your childhood. Since you were an only sibling, only child, what was it like growing up like that?
Well, once again, you're in a situation that you are that only child. And you don't know what it is for other people. I know that I went ahead and I really looked for companionship of people my own age in the neighborhood. That I did. But other than that, maybe looking for friends to associate with, you sort of did what you did. That was it.
Did you make did you make a lot of friends trying to meet people?
Well, you had friends. There wasn't any television. There wasn't anything else. You had to play together. Once you started going to school, you started to make associations. And don't forget, it wasn't a matter that we lived a distance from each other. You were in the neighborhood. I had a classmate of mine that from grade school that lived 2 blocks away from me. Another one that maybe we met halfway somewhere in a park or something like that. And it was a matter that you could get to his house in walking maybe 10 minutes or so. So it was a matter, you were in the neighborhood. It isn't like today you make some friends and if you don't have a car, you got parents to drive you to where that individual is at. So it was the circumstance that you lived in a neighborhood, and so you picked up these friends, and much of what we did, we walked to, as opposed to drove to. I walked to school. I walked to church. I walked by my friends. I walked for my entertainment when I wanted to go see a movie, which was maybe 10 blocks away from my house. But you did that. You did that. And everybody else did too.
What kind of stuff, when you and your friends wanted to hang out, where did you guys usually go and walk to?
Well, the city of Cudahy in those times afforded you awful lot of opportunity to do stuff in your neighborhood. I could take you and show you where we lived and where the empty lots were that we played baseball. I can take you to the park that was within walking distance that we used when we played football. Everything was close by. Everything was easy to get to. It was a matter that there was a lot of open space in those times. Really, things started to change after the Second World War, is when a lot of building took place. But prior to that time, there were a lot of open areas that you could go and play ball in, or do whatever, just romp around in the empty space. But it wasn't a matter that you had to go far for any kind of exercise that you wanted. And we were blessed in Cudahy, too, to have parks in different parts of the city that you could get to, like I said, by walking. They used to have, when I was in grade school, the parks afforded different kinds of activities. You talked about the Depression. I can remember as a kid, they used to have a service that was provided by the county called Toy Loan. And I can remember going to a public school playground, and on it had a building, not a big building, that you could go in and pick up a bike and use it, and then when you were done with it, you could bring it back. And so they called it a toy loan service, and that's what it was. So kids made use of that, made a lot of use of it.
Okay, so basically, I mentioned walking to school. What was the school you walked to, and what was the church you walked to?
Well, I walked to Holy Family, which was a school located on Hammond and Swift Avenues. In proximity to my home, it was a 2-block walk. And we didn't have, as a young kid, I remember, I don't really remember how often my parents walked me to school. It was, we had that, now I would say, I guess it was a privilege that we didn't know that we went on our own, and the areas that we walked in allowed us to do just that, to be able to walk and make your way around the city and not have any kinds of problems. So it was a wonderful thing, now looking back at that. And like I said, it was all neighborhood kids that right across the street from our Catholic school was a public school. It was called Kosciuszko. It was named after a Revolutionary War hero here in the United States. And he was Polish. And we ended up interacting with those people from across the street. And it was what it was, and it was able to be done. You moved around in the city very freely, very freely.
What was your favorite class as a kid?
What was my favorite class in that time? Oh my goodness. Well, everything was the ordinary stuff. English, you had some history, different classes. You had language. You had religion. when I was a kid in the school Holy Family, in as much as it was a very much of a Polish neighborhood, they did teach the Polish language in the school. Remember taking part in that. And but as to a favorite subject, I liked history. I liked history an awful lot.
All right. Do you remember ever going to Milwaukee as a kid?
Yeah. Yes, I did. Excuse me. How, in those days, you would go by streetcar. Do you know what a streetcar is?
Like the hops thing you got?
Yeah. Not as modern as that, but it was it was a streetcar. And then after a while, a bus service started. And then I can remember that you could, for example, go for a certain portion, you went by streetcar, and then after that, you went by bus. And they had different routes that you went on. They were, in order, if you had to really go into Milwaukee, sometimes you had a transfer to another streetcar, or you had a transfer to a bus. And that is the way people got around Milwaukee from its suburbs all around Milwaukee. They had the streetcars and buses that took us into the city of Milwaukee, into the downtown, into the south side, north side, and that's the way it was done.
Mentioned Milwaukee. In the time you used to travel around Milwaukee, has anything changed, or have you seen the construction of any buildings while the time you traveled around there?
Well, when you're looking back, and I'm 87 years old, if you go ahead and think of what you saw in your childhood, then as you grew, and I would say until after the Second World War, you really started seeing both residential, a great amount of residential growth, and also business growth. Some of the growth that was started in the Second War was precipitated by what the government needed for them to fight the war. But a lot of it really was to get the production going in order to fight the war, the machinery that they needed, the supplies that they needed. And it ended up being the cause of economic growth, change, social change, economic change, that brought about people doing the life really, really taking a change, because otherwise things were just settled. They were pretty much settled. In my childhood, I don't remember, really seeing drastic change. Change was very slow, not like you're living now. Today it's one thing, tomorrow it can be something else. And so it is a matter that the war brought on an awful lot of change. Buildings were expanded. Like here in the city of Cudahy, we had a company that made war machinery. It was the Laddish Company. They grew, they cover, by the time the war was ended, their buildings extended for almost 9 blocks to accommodate what they needed in space. And that was not uncommon. A lot, like I said, an awful lot of expansion took place because of what they needed in material, and so that they had the business, but they didn't have the room. So they built the room to make it happen. And that brought an awful lot of change about. And growth.
Since you lived in Cudahy, did you know anything about the meatpacking business from Patrick Cudahy?
Well, Patrick Cudahy came to the city of Cudahy because he was getting a bad time by the people in Milwaukee, where he wanted to buy a large acreage, and they just did not want that type of business. So he came to Cudahy, bought 800 acres of land, and he built his factories. He built his slaughterhouse. He built his meatpacking company. To the benefit of the city of Cudahy, which many of its people were gainfully employed at that company, and they made their livelihood from that company. They had the great benefit of being able to walk to work, not having to have a vehicle. It was all here. The same thing with the Laddish Company. There in Cudahy, we had a business called the Myers Company, and they made bottling equipment. They made equipment that moved, for example, in conveyor belts, moving bottles of for milk, for beer, for soda. And at one point in the, I want to say the 1960s, that business controlled 80% of the bottling business in the United States.
Did you know anyone involved in the meat packing in Cudahy?
Do I know?
Yeah.
I had an uncle that worked for them. I had 2 uncles that worked for them. And 3 of my mother's sisters worked for Patrick Cudahy. In delivery, in processing, in packaging. Yeah.
Did they enjoy the job?
Pardon?
Did they enjoy the job?
Well, as much as I heard from them as it related to it, it was a job, and it was a livelihood for them. And years ago, you didn't complain an awful lot about what you did. You worked and you did your job, and that was the end of it.
You mentioned a lot. You talked a bit about World War II and economic growth. Have you? You mentioned this before. You were not involved in any way in the battlefield in World War II or any war. If you go back, you're talking from about 39 to 44. I was a kid in grade school. I was from the 6th to the 8th grade during that time. And you had your scares. I remember sitting and listening to the fact that the war had started on December 7th. I remember it was over the radio. That was the media that we had that delivered what was going on. And other than that, of knowing a lot of neighbors enlisting in service, being drafted to go to the various military services. I remember that. I remember that they used to have U.S. bond drives to raise money to support the war. I remember people giving blood
so that they would have the blood for people that were wounded. And there were different kinds of organizations that sponsored various things to help the men in service. Various veterans groups got active as a result of them being around from the First World War, and they would support things that supported them, the military. So that went on. But that's about my recollection of the war. I remember rationing. There was gas rationing. There was meat rationing. Sometimes certain food products were rationed. And I remember us having, we had, you were given ration stamps to buy particular things. And it was like in an allotment thing that you could buy X number of pounds of meat. And I know several things that there were shortages of, only because there wasn't product, or that the government consigned it for service to the military, that the military should take it first. But yeah, rationing was there. And it limited, you limited what you could get, where you could go, because it depending upon, how you used your gas, it maybe didn't allow for too much leisure time to go like areas like Chicago, or going up north, or things like that, or taking a vacation for those years. Yeah.
Do you remember anything about the Victory Gardens?
Everybody in the time, because of the circumstance of not being able to get certain things, adopted to what they could do to get it for themselves. The Victory Garden was that. It was the matter that it gave the opportunity for most of these people they had gardens in their backyards. Most of them. And it was a matter of also with that, if you had enough, you shared it with somebody else. But it was a matter, that was a way to answer it. If you wanted vegetables, grow them. All you had to do is get just a little bit of space, and it was taken care of. I noticed like a gentleman almost kitty corner from Pulaski Inn, he had a lot just on the corner of of his property. There was an empty lot, and then there was his house, and on the other side there was an empty lot. Well, on that empty lot to the corner, he dug it up and planted stuff. Tomatoes, carrots, cucumbers, whatever. And they lived off that. Your grandfather and grandmother that lived in Milwaukee, probably in this time, maybe a little bit later, in the summer, literally, they lived out of the garden. Whatever they were eating, with the exception of poultry or meats, everything was grown from their garden. Grandpa had lettuce back there, he had tomatoes, and his famous hot peppers, and that's what they lived with. And nobody, for anything, didn't starve. So it is a matter that in these areas, I think the Americans, as a people, because they came from this wide variety of nationalities with different kinds of skills, different kinds of likes in food, in entertainment, whatever, they adopted the right word would be they adapted to this country, and they adapted to the things that they needed. And they were very, very successful at doing that.
All right. You mentioned that your grandpa had famous hot chili peppers. Can you explain a bit more on that?
It was just a product. It was just a type of pepper that they made, as for example now is given credit to, like, for example, the Mexicans in the food that they have, that they use peppers in their various foods that they make. And you have a matter of having something that's mild, something that's sharper. It's just, what was your preference? If you didn't like peppers, I'll guarantee you didn't grow them. You know, probably the most popular of peppers was a green pepper that you got into all kinds of stuff, stews and everything else. But
do you know anyone that was drafted in the war?
Oh yeah, well, a lot of, you know, it was a matter that in some cases people, because of their patriotism, their anger at what happened, volunteered, and volunteered quickly. They had lines all around places where you went to sign up to go to the military. And then afterward, people who, as the need became greater, then they had the drafting system. And then you got a nice letter from the government saying that, dear old government requests that you offer your services. And it was with in the beginning they were telling you, they were giving you a time that you would have to serve, a length of time. After that, it didn't mean a thing. You just stayed there until the war was done.
All right. What was can you talk a bit about your high school experience? What was going on?
Well, my father, God bless him, got talked into by a friend of his that I should go off to a boarding school. He had 5 sons and a daughter. One was my age. 4 of those boys went to that high school. So he talked my dad to sending with me with his son. Well, I wasn't initially a little excited when I got there. It was a boarding school, St. Bonaventure. It was in Sturtevant, Wisconsin. That's just a little bit south of Milwaukee. And it was a 4-year high school, a minor seminary and a high school. It was staffed by Franciscan fathers. After a while, it's a matter of, again, making associations. There were people there from the state of Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio, New York, a couple of other states that I don't remember now, but they came together. Now that's something in itself to adjust to that. It's a matter of adjusting, of living away from home. No mama and daddy is around to take care of you. You fend for yourself. And you adapt. And that's what I did in those 4 years. In my in the latter portion of my sophomore year, my junior year, I smashed my hand in a printing press that was on premise, that I was trying to get a little bit of a trade in to do do printing. And I reached underneath the press came back, caught my hand, and I lost 3 fingers. What do I remember about my high school years? Well, I remember that. I remember it very well. I remember the experience of working through it, working through what I was thinking that was going to do to me. What would I have to do to overcome what happened? Several operations. Probably by the time I was done, it took almost 2 years before it was done. But it was a good thing. And I lived it with these boys. I still think that if I hadn't been in the circumstance of where I was, and it might have happened at home, I don't think I would have had the good fortune that I had in what I learned how to do without those 3 fingers. I really gained some very valuable lifetime friends that we associated for the next 60, 70 years of our life. I learned to do a lot of things that I never thought I'd be capable of doing, but I've done them. And after being there, even into the final years, it was difficult to say goodbye to these people, or so long, or whatever. We ran into each other over the years. We had different kinds of class reunions that we had. They used to have picnics at the school that drew the attendance of alumni and families to go to these events. So it was a great learning experience, and I'm absolutely not saddened for having to attend that place for 4 years.
What was the hardest difficulty to overcome or get used to after the accident with your fingers?
Well, how I'm going to adapt to using, when you have, for example, a portion of that of the operation of the plastic surgery was I had my hand sewed on to a graft that was made on my stomach, and I had that hand placed in a socket of that graft for 2 months. And that's the way I walked around. After that happened, there were some additional things that had to be done. Well, I'll tell you one thing, I was a righty when I had fingers, and I'm a righty now that I don't have fingers. And I'm still writing with my right hand. And I don't know, I went off, and after a while, the way those young fellas treated me, in a sense that they didn't cut me any slack. I didn't feel that I was handicapped in any way. The only thing that I was handicapped, if I was too lazy to do something and get it done. It was for me to do, not for somebody else. So I really thank them for doing that with me. I can remember one instance. This was maybe in the latter part of the junior year, I think the closing. We were out playing baseball, intramural stuff, and I came on the field. Nobody made anything of it that I was there. And I said, is it all right if I play? Sure, why not? And I asked them, does somebody have a glove? And one of the guys said back to me, do you see anybody else having one? If you want to play, you play the way we play. And little things like that sober you up to accept what's going on in your life and do what you got to do. That's it.
Okay. One final question about high school. What was your main, when you were in high school, do you have any aspirations or plans for like either a future career or a job?
If you looked in the senior, in our annual, you will see under my name, my nickname, they called me the judge. Everybody said because of my big mouth, I was going to be an attorney. Well, that didn't happen. And so I ended up going to Marquette. Like I said, the circumstances were that I graduated from Marquette U in 1954. 2 years later, my lovely wife, who I met at Marquette, became my wife for 63 years. It was good. It was good. I didn't know what I was going to do. The sadness is when I was at Marquette, like you will find when you guys get there, they've got all kinds of counselors. If you don't make it in college now, it's really, really your fault. Because there's all kinds of ways to help you through it, to guide you. Now, dumb me, I didn't take that kind of advantage. But my beautiful wife did. She lived and breathed that Marquette U for the 4 years that she was there. Literally, she got there at 7 and they threw her out of the buildings at 11 at night. But she was a great student. She was a great friend and had a good time, enjoyed the Jesuit experience. And I was fool enough that I would, once I was done with classes, I headed straight home. But she not. She enjoyed school and what university life could do for her. And she was great. She was great. And we married in 1956. Had 6 wonderful children. And I've been very blessed. Very blessed. Excuse me.
We last left off, we were talking about colleges. Do you have any specific plans for majors or careers at the time you graduated?
When I initially went to Marquette, and in the sophomore year, you start thinking of your major. And I thought of myself, I thought I had a sort of a push to go toward social work. I thought I went to Marquette and I got a 4-year degree instead of going just for 3 years and then going to the law school. And you get your law degree, and if you get the law degree, you get your bachelor's degree along with it if you've completed law school. Well, anyways, I went all 4 years. I didn't take that as a chance that if I went to law school, I would have that. Well, anyways, I thought of going into social work. Well, then graduated, and then I attended law school, and I attended law school from, well, till March. And I was sort of a mind that I thought law school was one thing, and I found myself in having to re-examine what I wanted to do from the standpoint that I started to realize how much in law you had to worry about detail. Detail and preciseness. And I sort of felt that in that particular qualities that you need, I wasn't capable of giving that the attention that it required. And as a result, I know in a sense that it must have been a disappointment to my mother and father, because you keep on hearing that your kid's going to do this, he's going to do this, and it end up that's not the case. But as a matter, then I went off and I tried to find some work. I ended up working in a drop forge in their lab department for a while. And that was about just about a year or so that was the case. And like I said, this happened, I graduated in '54, and we went into that tavern business in 1956. So it was a 2-year period that I was sort of bopping around a little bit. Then it was after that, sort of stayed with the business. But it so happened that what befell my mother and father in the period of the Depression also followed their son. The bar business and Pulaski Inn, as we had it, was a little bit slow. And as a result, we had to start thinking about what we're going to do. Well, my beloved wife said, "Why don't you go and teach?" I said, "What?" I said, I've got no teaching credits. She says, "Who cares? You'd be a good teacher." I said, "By whose standards?" She said, "I'm telling you, you'd be a good teacher." So, lo and behold, in the month of November, I went to the Catholic Archdiocese offices and presented myself to a person who was in charge of school teachers. And I presented myself and said, "I'm looking for work." And she said, "Do you know what time of the year this is?" She says, "There's nothing open." Well, I said, even if something happened, like in the sense of a substitute teacher. And she says, "All right." She says, "Here's an application." Now, mind you, this was on a Tuesday that I went, and I didn't fill the application out. I didn't get that done. And I gets a phone call that a principal at St. Augustine's grade school on the south side of Milwaukee would like to talk to me. And so I went. And the dear lady, God bless her, she saw in me, I guess, what my wife saw, that I could do a decent job. And she's talking to me like I'm hired. And I'm sort of saying to her, well, please, just give me an opportunity and I think I'll do all right for you. And I couldn't get it through my head. So anyways, it ended up that I did start there in November of 1957. And gentlemen, it had to be the happiest time of my whole life. I initially coming there, I taught the 6th grade. And then down a couple of years, and they decided to departmentalize the 7th and 8th grade. And so my principal assigned me that I should be the social studies teacher. And I did that for the balance of my time. I was there at St. Augustine's for 13 years. I honestly think that I had the opportunity to live in the golden time of Catholic schools, of education, in a sense that you were pretty well respected. In fact, sometimes I don't know if the amount of respect that you got for being a teacher was really, it sort of surprised me. The effect that people felt that you had and would have on their children also awoke in me of the terrible responsibility I had to do right by the children that were in my class. In the 13 years that I taught school, it was a wonderful experience. I had the respect of my fellow faculty members. The children were very good to me. I was the first male teacher to come to St. Augustine's. And the time, in that time, the church and Catholic education was changing. But in some of the cases, looking back, some of the changes were good and some not so good. But it was always a matter that what was there was God. Always what was there was God. And it was a matter that having that ability, because my faith in those times was good, strong, I felt that I wanted to deliver that. And it was wonderful being in a circumstance that what you were trying to do, it was so very blessed with support. Support of your the faculty members, support of the parents, the fact that your word to them meant something. Their intention was to help you. They never said that that's what you're supposed to be doing. Don't bother me with this. I brought my kids here to be educated. You take care of that. No, no, no. It was a matter that I had that feeling that everybody that was involved in this matter of education was interested in getting it right. So I spent that time there. As I said, it was also the wonderful experience that followed those years that I left education was running into these young people all around this area, them walking up to me walking up to them, and having the surprise of that encounter, and being asked to different things in their lives. I guess that was the blessing that came from being part of that profession of teaching. And I left it when I turned the age of 40. I don't know where that 40 came from, but I said way back when I started that I felt that I would probably be able to be around till I was 40 years of age. Lo and behold, in that 40th year, our 6th child was born. And that sort of was the cream on top of the ice cream. My wife said, I think it's time you come home. The business was getting busier, taking more time. Things got a whole lot better in that time frame. And that was the next change that we made, from moving from teaching, moving exclusively into running the Pulaski Inn, going through the various changes that took place in those following years. But all of it was good. And in all of these things, God was very much a part of my life and my wife's and my family's life. And I have nothing but gratitude for how our good Lord took me by the hand and walked me through my responsibilities as I was growing in age and the different things that I was doing.
For one follow-up question for you was, how did Vatican II impact the teachings, your teachings?
Pardon?
How did the Vatican II impact your teachings?
Well, you are all too young to remember a thing known as the Baltimore Catechism. Baltimore Catechism was a system of teaching religion by a series of questions and answers. And as we went through school, you learned these matters of the Baltimore Catechism and memorized them, that they stayed with you. Well, Vatican II came along and sort of took that concept away, in a sense that it wasn't this matter of getting these questions, getting these answers, getting them into your head. And that's where they stayed. And those were the markers that you went ahead in life using as your guides. Well, what was replaced with it was a lot more liberty in sort of, you're going to talk through what you are experiencing now in school. It's not a matter of memorization of these things. It's a matter of talking through and trying to understand them. But the matter of also the culture of the church changed in that with these changes came a great deal of a change in thinking and behavior. And some different kinds of studies that were done of this time sort of indicated that there wasn't a sort of a framework that Vatican II was working in. It was a matter of which particular group and their particular wantings the church to do who got a hold of the agenda and moved the church in that direction. And I personally, and again, this is my personal opinion, I think for the lack of what people were really looking and wanting Vatican II to do, it is a matter, if you're going along and you don't know where you're going, well, how do you know where you want to get to? If you're not using a guide of some kind of a goal that you're trying to establish. And I think this is where the church sort of left the guideposts that were left for them. Maybe they didn't like the structure of how our education was done in the matters of religion, but they didn't substitute it with a better system in helping you to learn. I know, like, for example, we had a catechism, and I don't know if you'd call it a catechism, but it was a book that was used in the 6th grade, that you read things and then you discussed them. And then there were just a couple of questions to answer on what that was. I really, really wonder if somebody, like in the 6th grade and younger, has that capacity to take from reading and make some adaptation of that or that you're able to discuss it, or able to discuss it intelligently. It was my experience that it was not the case. And so these young people that were in your charge were sort of left in a sense of not getting enough basic instruction. I think something like what they were trying to do is maybe it has its place in high school, but it didn't have its place in the parochial school. And I think that there is where some of the problem lies right now in the church, and some of the problems we're having in the church as far as keeping people in it. They don't have a basic knowledge of their religion. It was a very funny thing. I attended I don't know if you young fellas ever heard of the Men for Christ. It's a organization that comes together, I believe, in March of a year. In March that they have a meeting, and it attracts a couple of thousand people. And there was a gentleman there was a speaker, and he was a convert. And he was a convert from baptism. From the Baptist church. And it ended up that he said, you know, you Catholics, you got it all wrong. He said, what you should have happened to you in your lives is you should have been first Baptists, where you get the education of the scriptures, and then you'd have changed your faith perspective entirely differently in being a Catholic. And that has stayed with me to the extent that I think in some cases he's got the right thing, because these people are it's not a matter maybe they got, you know, the fine points of Scripture, or that they have the ability to really pick Scripture about, but they have the basics of what God is trying to do for us, and they live it and try to live it. The matter of religion is not such a simple thing. There's a lot to be learned. There's an awful lot of matter of faith. There's an awful lot of matters of regulations of the church and how they fit this whole picture that causes you to have a strong faith. Because it just doesn't come to you. It is a matter that you must learn this. Learn about the sacraments. Learn about the commandments. Learn about social behavior. How you interact. You have 2 great commandments. Well, how does that fit in? How do you fit in to fitting in doing what those commandments are telling you to do? So that is where I sort of felt that was a little bit of a challenge for me to accept what the message of Vatican II was. And I think you're still having people talking about it in that regard.
All right. So after you were done teaching, is this when you started working at Pulaski Inn? Was it when you took over for your parents in Pulaski Inn, or were you already working there?
We, in 56 we came. The next change as far as I was working and teaching, and this sort of took me to 1971 when I finished teaching. And then our business made changes in that we weren't just simply a bar and hall. We went into catering. We prepared the food. We served it. And that was a very large change that came, but it was a good move that we made. We grew very well in it. My wife, Mary, handled that phase of the business, was very, very good at getting together a group of people that were very loyal, very knowledgeable, very gifted in the area of food preparation. And we were blessed to have a very, very good run of business from that about 1968 until 1990 when we sold the business. We left there in 1998, after being there for 42 years, my wife and I. And an important factor for us as far as that business was concerned, I mentioned earlier that my wife and I had 6 children. Those 6 children were very, very, very much a part of that business. In helping in food preparation, in helping in cleaning, in helping in setting up the hall for various affairs that we had. Excuse me, participating in the business by getting their hands dirty and getting them exposed to what it is to make a dollar. And I think that business, not in their minds, I don't know, but maybe they tell you that now, that it served as a very strong basis for their work ethic. And they truly have a great work ethic. And I'll give you a little bit of an incident that happened, and it's well past the time that I can be prosecuted for it. I was outside working, and I was scrubbing carpets, and I wasn't paying any attention to what was going on around me, but lo and behold, a car pulled up alongside of the sidewalk. And the window went down, and someone inside said, "Ray, get in here." And I bent down and I looked in, and I said, "Oh, it's the captain of detectives." So I got into the car, and he says, "Ray, listen to me. You be honest with me. Don't lie to me." I said, "Oh, okay, what's going on?" He says, "Are your sons bartending for you?" I said, "Yes, they are." "Now look," he said, "you know that you got to be 21 years of age." I said, "Yeah." "Well, what are you going to do?" I said, "What are you going to tell me to do?" He said, "Look, that's not supposed to be done." I said, "You know, Charlie, you go back to the city hall, go to the police department, and see if on any blotter in that police department you see any one of my kids' names on it. And I'll save you the time. You don't have to look, because you're not going to find their names there. And Charlie, you know why you're not going to find their names there? Because they're right alongside their father and mother in running this business." He said to me, "Get the hell out of the car." And never bothered me thereafter. Now that's Cudahy in times that, you know, something like that could happen and you could be treated that way. Today things would be a little bit more difficult. You really got to live to the letter of the law. But in those times, common sense was pretty much the way people operated. If it's working and it's doing good and it's hurting nobody, they pretty much left you alone. But by the way, that was really, I thought, in my lifetime in that saloon business, my finest hour. That when I stood behind that bar, the only people alongside me were my sons. And it was a great, great experience for me and for them. We, like I say, we were there till 1998. We were blessed that our cook was able to buy the business from us. And my wife and I retired. And we retired here in Cudahy. And we've been in retirement for about 22 years now. In 1990, I've always had my nose in politics. I said to my wife, at the particular time that this was, a gentleman was the mayor of the city of Cudahy for 24 years. And I sort of said to my wife, if it is a matter I'm going to give this a try, I'm not getting any younger. And so I think it would be a good thing that if I'm going to do it, I should be doing it soon. Well, I took that thought to a couple of friends. Some agreed. One of the gentlemen did not, because he was a member of the Common Council of the city of Cudahy and was active, very active. He said he wanted to run. So I stepped aside. He was a friend of mine, and he ran. But unfortunately, he did not win the election. At that time, the terms for office were 2-year terms. So 2 years later, I ran again and was blessed to win, and stayed in that position, as I've repeated a couple of times, 14 years. It was a great experience. And one of the great experiences about it was I really was blessed to find myself surrounded by a wonderful group of people who made up the city's administration. All of the department heads that I worked with, it ended up that we worked very well together and were very, very successful at making changes within the city that were very beneficial. And I really, I was so blessed, and I have to repeat it over and over again. The important thing is, I guess, when a leader is given his marching orders to lead, then he must bring along those people that makes his leadership happen. And I was very, very blessed to have that done. I was mayor till the age myself was 72. And in that time, some nice things happened in the city of Cudahy. We did some renovation of our downtown. We had various governmental programs that turned out to be quite successful in bringing new new and successful business into the city of Cudahy. I was very blessed to have the support of the citizens of Cudahy. In those 14 years, I had to run for re-election 6 times. I never had an opponent. The only time I had an opponent is when I ran for the job the first time. But I felt that at age 72, I didn't know what life was holding for me. And at that time already, if I told you that we sold the business in 98, we were already retired 6 years, and I thought maybe I should be paying more attention to my lovely wife and that we could do a little traveling a little bit. And so came the decision to retire in 2004. The funny thing is that one day I found myself sitting in my office. There was no phone calls. There was nothing I had to do. No interruptions. And I'm sitting there and saying to myself, when I had announced that I was going to retire, what the hell did I do? I don't have any hobbies. I don't golf. I said, my God, I don't know what I'm going to do with the time. Well, lo and behold, I soon realized that with retirement come other things that you end up doing. And I'm very happy that I did retire at the age of 72. I loved what I did. And more importantly, I loved what I did because I loved working with the people that God placed in my life at that time. I really, really was blessed.
All right. I have a question for you regarding your time as mayor. Did you ever feel a lot of pressure as mayor at all when it comes to like certain things you got to do?
You know, the funny thing is, in those 14 years, there were things that came across the desk, and circumstances happened within the city that required decision making. But the wonderful thing is, as I told you, I was blessed with some very, very bright, honest, trustworthy administrators who, when I used to meet with them on any occasion that any kind of thing came up, I never said to them, I've got a problem. My comment to them always was, we have got a problem. And in those 14 years, I was never disappointed that anybody said to me, who is this we that's going to solve your problem? It was always accepted that we work together and solve what needed to be solved. And we were, I would say with a great deal of pride, very, very successful in running this city for those 14 years.
All right. what kind of major decisions did you have to make while I was married? Like, what major decisions did you do for the city?
Through that time, there were always circumstances. You're always looking for money. And the great source of the money comes from the state. The challenges are that people want things, but they don't want to pay for them. And so that's the constant challenge that there is every time there's a budget period. But we seemed, with the effectiveness of staff, that we were able to meet those things. In 1994, the state allowed communities to do tax increment finance districts as a promotional tool to create an economic development within a community. I'll not go into the specifics of it, but what it happens is you put a space, an area in your community, and for its circumstances, you are able to establish it as a district, and with that, it gives you the avenue of creating certain things that you can do by giving advances to businesses to promote their coming into your city. The city of Cudahy had 3 of those districts. The first one was the largest one, and that was really probably, if you want to talk about what happened in those 14 years, that probably was the biggest decision to do this TIF district, let alone you had to sell it to the Common Council, your board of directors, so to speak, but you also had to sell it to the people. And as I said again, I was blessed to have in that time frame, let alone consultants, but own staff that were able to explain to the satisfaction of the citizenry of Cudahy that this was a good idea. That TIF District 1 created $190 million of additional growth to the city of Cudahy. You are seated in one of the projects that was a part of that TIF district. This real estate development of 60 acres was a part of that TIF district. And it really brought a business park. We helped several of the businesses in the city of Cudahy to strengthen their status here in the city. And it became very, very, very successful. And I view that as probably one of the finer accomplishments of that 14 years. And continue seeing results. That additional growth has come as a result of it as well. But those were difficult decisions to be made. I recall when the consultant was talking us about creating this TIF district, and I said, you know, how long is this going to take to work through? He says, Mayor, I think it'll be about 30 years. Oddly enough, sure enough, that's what it was. 30 years of progress and growth. And Cudahy is better for what happened as a result of that TIF district.
All right. Are any of the ideas you had while as mayor, established, are they still around today?
Yes, yes. Like I said, the TIF district, it just closed. It'll close next year. And all of the encumbrances of loans that were taken out for infrastructural work have been completed. All of the things that the TIF said it was going to do have been completed. And so now, for example, the city is rethinking what they might be able to do in other areas and create TIFs to upgrade those areas, so that I think for having had these TIFs and had them successful, the new mayor has it a little bit easier to sell the job that this idea is a good idea and it's beneficial to Cudahy.
All right. Do you know any famous people you've met while as mayor?
Well, over the years, I've had the pleasure of being able, one of the longest governors that we had was George Thompson. I had the pleasure of meeting him on several occasions. I dealt with Mayor of Milwaukee. He sort of came in a couple of years before I left, but I had known him from when he was a state assembly person. Running into people of the time that were our senators and Congress people and local officials. By local, I mean the state assembly people. And in my mind, running into some very important people in business, both in the city of Cudahy and in Milwaukee, were advantageous to me. I encountered a great many people. I always tried to be at the different kinds of events that would bring me into contact with these people, to use them in a sense of gaining their knowledge and learn about their abilities, what they did in the things that they were doing, and use that to be of benefit to the city of Cudahy.
All right. Just one moment. Did any decision in Milwaukee impact Cudahy at all, or vice versa? Did Cudahy impact Milwaukee?
Well, different kinds of instances that come about, various events can bring about change, good and bad. For example, there was a mayor in Milwaukee. I think he was one of the longest running mayors in Milwaukee. Mayor Meyer, Summerfest is his accomplishment. He worked on that. And at one particular point in the time of the 70s, you were dealing with situations where there was a great deal of unrest from the standpoint of racial tensions existed. For several, I would say, good reasons, there were tensions. People were limited to where they could live. Certain pieces of legislation were written that limited where people could live. And so that tension came in between Milwaukee, where principally some of this stuff was in Milwaukee, and also in the suburbs. And the tension between Milwaukee and the suburbs became very intense and stayed that way for several years. And so it ended up that you had racial problems that took place that primarily were impacting Milwaukee, but now starting to spill over into the suburbs. And so as a result, those tensions led to difficulties in how you cooperated with each other. For example, in the case with the matter of relationships prior to that, they used to have a group that the mayors of the various communities and village presidents would meet with some regularity. Well, it ended up that Mayor Meyer announced that he was going to no longer attend these, and thus causing this group of people. The group was called the Intergovernmental Cooperative Council, went and stayed together without Milwaukee. Now, I don't know if, for example, I don't know the thinking of Mayor Meyer. I'm thinking that he felt that the suburbs weren't doing enough to correct the problems that were being presented in the status of housing and things of that nature. And he sort of was saying, Milwaukee's tired of doing the lifting. You aren't doing enough to make it happen. And so it forced these mayors and village presidents of the time to go ahead and organize and work through these things. And so that, carried on for several years, even to the time that I was mayor, that you had these reoccurrences of different kinds of things. And it was always your effort of watching that legislation that was being made, for example, in the state, couldn't hurt and harm the communities that, for example, were a part of Milwaukee County and Milwaukee. And that was, in that time, you really had to be alert because change was coming, and it was coming quick. And, in these times, at these meetings of this cooperative council, some of this stuff really took on different kinds of meetings, different kinds of needs to be satisfied, different kinds of solutions to be found, so that the peace could be preserved. But that's That's what democracy is all about. There's a lot of great people who try to do what's good for people. I think the best government that you can have is the closest government to you. The further that government is away from you, the less control you have over it. The best control is here in the towns, the villages, the cities, that you meet these legislators regularly. You know where the mayor is at. You know where to go and talk to him or her. It's the best. But when it is what it is, as we now have and look at what is going on the national level, it's the greatest proof that the best government is the closest government to you. Because what is happening on the national level is an absolute embarrassment. An absolute embarrassment.
All right. You mentioned civil rights. You mentioned a little bit of like equality. Do you have any recollection of the civil rights and the white flight?
Well, it was a matter that now,
like in Cudahy.
Let's put it this way. It was very uncommon in the time that I was growing up that I encountered any colored people. You boys can't say that. You encounter all kinds of different kinds of cultures and people that are a part of these cultures. I was a school director for 12 years. And in those 12 years, we had what is known as Chapter 220. And it was a program to promote different races coming into schools in the suburbs. They were that was busing that started to bring the black people into the suburbs of Milwaukee County. That was a heavy thing to do. I think you hear from some that it was successful for them. I don't know that, for example, in some cases it was the best thing in uprooting these people, breaking the neighborhood school system down and busing people all over the county. I think the jury is still out on that, if that worked well and it accomplished what it wanted to do. I don't know. But all of these things were things that happened through the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Do you know anything about, one more thing about the civil rights, have you ever, what do you know, Father Glowacki?
He was around, but not in my time.
All right.
Not in my time. Earlier.
All right, and then over a lifespan, what kind of things have you noticed changed or transformed in Milwaukee and or Cudahy? A lot of times. Well, you've been around
I think you have changes going on, and the changes that are going on are of such a nature that the car and what the car has been able to give the people the freedom that they do and that they do use has a definite impact on relationships among communities. Years ago, it was a funny thing that people sort of stayed in their neighborhood areas. Now it's a matter that, you know, you can't talk about neighborhood, that there isn't really that tight little unit that there was. Now, you know, with the creation and the car and its mobility and the things that it lets you go and do, you know, people travel great distances to have specific kinds of jobs and to live in specific kinds of areas that they want to live in. That wasn't a matter years ago. Pretty much the people that, where you were in a community, you stayed in that community. It wasn't until, like I said earlier, in World War II, after World War II, that really the mobility of people really started growing. Remember that Oak Creek came into existence in 1950. St. Francis came into existence in 1950. That's not too long ago. And what caused that to happen is people's movement of wanting to go to other places. We did have a population. The city of Cudahy at one time was 24,000 people. You are now at 18,000. What happened? You could go up and down the streets and you would find homes that had 4, 5 children in them. Now you got maybe 2, 1. The big family is not what it was. The Cudahy school system, when I was a school board member, was 5,000. Now it's somewhere around 2,200, 2,300 children. So it is a matter of times, the population, the ability of population to move around, that makes the difference.
Do you have any other things about Milwaukee or Cudahy that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I really think that one of the things that has to start happening is that people are complaining that taxes are high, and somewhere people got to start thinking about ideas that can control taxes, that can control spending, and some of that is that they're going to have to start looking at merging some of these services that, for example, like in the area with Cudahy, St. Francis, and South Milwaukee, there isn't any reason on earth that they're not merged. The fire department and the police department. Now you say, why? Well, if you want to control expenses, you start looking at what's costing you money. You ask yourself, why do these 3 communities each need a ladder truck? How often is that used?
Not very.
And so as a result, the same thing as far as duplication of services in the police department. Now, thank God they're starting to wake up in some of these cases that they are creating circumstances that these departments work together. I told you that at some point, I don't know if I mentioned it, but excuse me, Mayor Meyer said that no longer would Milwaukee Fire Department respond to fires in the suburbs. Now the suburbs now have a service that they have that the whole of Milwaukee County is divided into districts, and that the fire departments in those districts work together to combat fires in that district, asking various pieces of equipment to come to fires in their communities. I don't know if you people recall this is a few years ago, that Patrick Cudahy had a big fire.
I remember that.
There were units from around the state that came in to control that. From around the state. I remember once going to a fire on Pennsylvania Avenue when I was mayor. I'm hearing these sirens. So I called the dispatcher, and they tell me that they're over on Pennsylvania Avenue. I went over there. I could not believe the number of fire units that were there. It was a company that had a fire. I could not believe the number of. We had them from Greenfield, South Milwaukee, Cudahy, St. Francis. But at that time, again, Milwaukee wasn't involved. Greendale sent people. And there were something like 71 pieces of equipment. I mean, this, if you had to duplicate that and you had to pay for it, oh my God. But these are the kinds of things that I think people got to start looking at. The matter of these companies coming together, this mutual aid, that's the terminology, mutual aid, came about and brought these pieces of equipment together. The police are the same thing. We're duplicating equipment that I think is very costly to maintain. And this is where you have to start looking. Some of these communities now, they're merging their health departments. And working that, for example, where they had a head nurse over the health department, the woman is the head nurse over 2 health departments. But what is expensive is the matter of labor. Labor is intensive, and providing services is expensive. And you've got to start making determinations about what needs to be done and what you need to do to give these services and to give them as economically as you can do. Because what you do, you just can't keep raising taxes, because all it does is keep on raising the cost of living and the inability of people to buy homes. And So it's a matter that until we stop concentrating on me and concentrating on what is good for all, that we're going to be able to make some changes. And I think in a lot of ways, there should be matters of merging. And I think maybe that's the thing of the political future. I don't know.
Is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, except thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Raymond Glowacki.
All right. Thank you.